The island in the fog. It was supposed to be a peaceful day, a quiet retreat to clear my head. The small lake, hidden deep in the woods, had always been a place of solitude for me. Few knew of its existence and even fewer bothered to explore it. But I did. I'd spent many afternoons rowing its still waters, the surrounding trees reflected perfectly in the glassy surface. Today, though, something felt different. The morning had started off clear enough, with soft sunlight filtering through the forest canopy as I made my way to the edge of the lake. My small rowboat, weathered but reliable, was tied to the dock. I had no specific destination in mind, just a desire to escape for a while, to feel the cool air on my face as I drifted aimlessly across the lake's surface. But then I saw it. The island. I'd been to this lake countless times and never once had I noticed an island in the middle. It was strange, too strange. My memory wasn't failing me. There had never been an island, not in the dozens of trips I'd taken out here. But there it was, rising out of the mist that seemed to cling to the far end of the lake, its dark silhouette barely visible through the low-hanging fog. Curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me toward it. I told myself it was probably just an illusion, a trick of the light or the fog. Maybe I'd never ventured far enough to see it before. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Still, the urge to explore was too strong to ignore. I untied the boat and pushed off from the dock, the wooden oars dipping into the water with a soft splash. The lake was calm, almost unnaturally so. There were no birds calling from the trees, no rustle of wind through the branches. Just silence, thick and oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath. As I rowed closer to the island, the fog seemed to thicken, swirling around the boat in ghostly tendrils. The shoreline of the island slowly came into view, rocky and barren, with a few twisted, leafless trees jutting out of the ground like broken bones. It looked ancient, untouched, and the air around it was heavy with an almost palpable sense of dread. When the boat finally scraped against the shore, I stepped out cautiously, the wet rocks slick beneath my feet. I hadn't noticed before, but the temperature had dropped. The air was cold, sharp, biting at my skin as I moved further onto the island. I shouldn't have been there. Every instinct in my body told me to turn back, to row away and never come back to this place. But something about the island drew me in. There was a stillness to it, an eerie quiet that felt wrong. As I wandered deeper into the island, I saw it. A small dark shape half buried in the dirt near the base of one of the twisted trees. At first I thought it was just a rock, but as I moved closer, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a rock. It was a skull. The hollow eye socket stared up at me, empty and cold. It was bleached white, the bone cracked and weathered by time. My pulse quickened as I crouched down, reaching out tentatively. My fingers hovered above it, trembling slightly. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. Like I didn't belong here. But I couldn't help myself. I touched it. The moment my fingers brushed against the cold bone, the sky above me darkened. The sun, which had been hidden behind a veil of fog, vanished completely, swallowed by thick, churning clouds that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The air grew heavy with moisture, the smell of rain and electricity filling my lungs. And then, from the depths of the lake, came a low rumble. The water, which had been so calm moments before, began to churn violently, waves rising out of nowhere, crashing against the rocks of the island. The wind howled, whipping through the trees with a deafening roar. The storm was sudden, fierce, as if the lake itself had awakened, angry and vengeful. I staggered back, dropping the skull as the ground beneath me seemed to shake. I had to get off the island. I had to get back to the boat before the storm swallowed me whole. But as I turned to run back to the shoreline, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. There, standing at the edge of the water, was a figure. It was tall, draped in tattered, soaked clothing that clung to its gaunt frame. Its face was obscured by the fog, but I could see enough to know that it wasn't human, at least not anymore. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, one foot stepping into the boat that I had left on the shore. Panic surged through me as I watched it. It wasn't rowing away. It was waiting for me. And then it turned its head toward me, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of hollow, black eyes staring straight through the fog, straight through the storm. Straight at me. Before I could move, before I could even think, the figure stepped into the boat fully and sat down, gripping the oars with long, skeletal fingers. With slow, deliberate strokes it began to row. Not away from the island, but back across the lake, back to the shore where I had come from. The storm raged around me, the wind tearing at my clothes, the waves crashing against the rocks. I was trapped on the island, watching helplessly as the boat, my boat, disappeared into the fog, the figure rowing it steadily through the chaos. And then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound that chilled me to the core. A low, wet, rasping breath. The figure was coming back. And it wasn't alone. The storm was relentless. Wind howled through the twisted trees of the island, the sky churning above like some great malevolent force had been unleashed. Waves battered the shoreline, sending sprays of freezing water into the air as I stood there, helpless, watching my boat, my only way out, vanish into the mist with that figure rowing it calmly away. I was trapped. The cold, biting wind cut through me, and for a moment, the weight of my situation crashed down on me. This island wasn't right, had never been right, and now I was stranded here, left at the mercy of whatever dark force had been awakened by my touch. The skull. That cursed ancient skull I had foolishly touched. I stumbled backward, panic bubbling up in my chest, my thoughts racing. There had to be another way. Another way off this cursed rock before whatever had taken the boat came back. The thought of those hollow, lifeless eyes sent a shiver through me. I ran. My feet slipped on the wet, rocky ground as I made my way across the small island, desperate for some kind of shelter, some kind of hope. The twisted trees seemed to loom over me, their bare branches clawing at the sky, as though the island itself was alive, watching, waiting. And then, on the far side of the island, I saw it. A boat. But not just any boat. A small motorboat half hidden in a shallow cove, its hull rocking gently against the rising waves. The paint was chipped and rust clung to its edges, but it looked functional. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, I could make it out of here. I didn't waste any time. My legs burned as I scrambled down the rocky slope, slipping and sliding on the slick moss that covered the ground. The wind screamed in my ears, whipping at my hair and clothes, but I kept going. My heart pounded in my chest, each step bringing me closer to the boat, closer to escape. The motorboat was old, clearly abandoned long ago, but it looked like it could still run. The engine, though rusted and worn, was intact. I hopped into the boat, nearly losing my balance as a wave crashed against the shore, sending water splashing over the side. My hands fumbled with the ignition as I prayed, "Please just let this thing work." I twisted the key. The engine sputtered, coughing like an old, dying animal. "Come on," I muttered through clenched teeth, twisting the key again, harder this time. "Please just." The engine roared to life. A deep, guttural sound that echoed across the lake, cutting through the storm. Relief washed over me, but there was no time to celebrate. I grabbed the throttle and steered the boat away from the island, the motor rumbling beneath me as I surged forward into the stormy waters. But the lake wasn't the same now. It had transformed. The calm, placid surface I'd seen that morning was gone, replaced by towering waves that crashed and rolled like a beast thrashing in the depths. The boat bucked and lurched violently as I fought to keep it steady, water spraying over the sides as the storm raged on. I looked back toward the island and my heart nearly stopped. Something was rising from the island. At first, I thought it was just the fog thickening and swirling in the storm, but no, this was different. The ground itself was shifting, moving as though something massive was stirring beneath the surface. The twisted trees swayed violently, some of them uprooting and toppling over as the island seemed to heave. And then it appeared. A giant skeletal hand, pale and slick with wet earth, emerged from the center of the island. It clawed its way out of the ground, dragging with it an enormous, towering figure. My mind could barely process what I was seeing. It was a skeleton, but not just any skeleton. This thing was impossibly large, easily towering over the trees, its bones blackened and twisted as though they had been scorched by fire and buried for centuries. The massive skull of the creature rose from the earth, its hollow eye sockets glowing with a faint, sickly green light. The bones cracked and groaned as it pulled itself free from the island, each movement slow and deliberate, like a giant being reborn after eons of sleep. I felt my hands trembling on the throttle as I tried to urge the boat forward, but the waves tossed me violently from side to side. My heart raced as I looked up at the monstrous figure now standing fully upright on the island, towering into the stormy sky. The skeleton turned its massive head toward me. It saw me. With a sound like thunder, it let out a deep, otherworldly groan that reverberated through the air, shaking the very ground. Its massive bony arms reached upward, the fingers curling like claws, and then, with a force that defied nature, the skeleton slammed its fists into the island, causing the ground to quake. I watched in horror as the island itself began to move. The rocks and trees were ripped from the earth as if the island was being torn apart. And then, with a terrible, unnatural lurch, the entire island began to tilt toward the lake. The skeleton, with one colossal motion, had upended the entire island. And I was right in its path. The boat surged forward, but I wasn't fast enough. I could see the massive chunks of earth, rock, and trees cascading into the water, creating waves that dwarfed anything I had seen before. A wall of water rushed toward me, carrying with it the remains of the island, the storm's fury intensifying with each passing second. I slammed the throttle forward, but it was no use. The massive wave crashed into the boat, lifting it into the air like a toy. For a moment I was weightless, the world spinning around me, the storm, the skeleton, the lake all blending into one chaotic blur. And then the boat tipped, flipped, and I was thrown into the freezing water. The cold hit me like 1,000 knives, stealing the breath from my lungs. I thrashed wildly, my limbs numb and useless in the icy water. The waves pulled me under, dragging me down into the depths of the lake. My vision blurred, the darkness of the water swallowing me whole as the world faded into black. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the towering skeleton, its glowing eyes watching me sink beneath the waves. And then, nothing.